saw one study that indicated that these masks are very helpful, that by wearing a mask, you have 0.2% less chance of getting COVID. So hooray for that 0.2%, especially for those of us who have had it or have had vaccinations. But I look forward to getting our freedom back at some point. But you can't have a free society if the media is dishonest. When the founders fought for the right to have free media, they anticipated that there should always be a majority of the media who would be willing to expose media who were dishonest. But we're living in a dangerous time when what used to be called the mainstream media is anything but honest, and that was played out before our very eyes and ears as Project Veritas had CNN, well, as this article says, a CNN head, but he had leadership, and he admitted quite a great deal about the abuses of CNN, the manipulativeness of CNN. This article from the Epoch Times, which, by the way, is under fire from the Chinese Communist Party. So since this administration seems to side with the Chinese Communist Party a great deal, they may be coming after the Epoch Times the way the Chinese Communist Party is. But we'll wait and see if that happens. But this story, dated April 14th, is a CNN head has personally intervened to order the cable network staff to display the number of people who have died from COVID-19 in the broadcast, according to CNN technical director, who was caught on hidden camera making the comments. The goal was to boost ratings, the director said, explaining fear really drives numbers and is the thing that keeps you tuned in. That's rather tragic. A former segregationist president Democrat named Franklin D. Roosevelt had said quite eloquently, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And he was right that should be a big concern, but what we're hearing from the undercover tape is that CNN sees fear as the best way to increase ratings. So another article from Gateway Pundit, CNN director caught on hidden camera saying the network is trying to help BLM by only pushing stories that implicate white people. Well, that's unfortunate. What that shows is that CNN doesn't mind being racist. It's very unfortunate. We would stir up that kind of animosity, have a major news network, or what used to be a major news network, CNN, pushing racist divides. And I've been joined by a friend. Hopefully she doesn't mind me calling her a friend, because that's the way I see her, from New York, an extraordinary member of Congress. Thrilled she's back. I'd yield to my friend from New York for such time as she may use.
Thank you. I appreciate you yielding. I just wanted to take a moment to take an opportunity to share with you something that I launched this week with the Representative Garcia from California, and that's the Election Integrity Caucus. And that caucus is, our mission is to make sure that we have and preserve integrity in our election process, and that we have people understand just how important the right to vote is and why it's such a sacred act and a cornerstone of our constitutional republic and the democratic principles that we hold dear. And a lot of people don't realize how important their right to vote is, and we just want to make sure that people understand that. We don't want it to be undermined. We think that the Speaker's signature legislation, H.R. 1, undermines the integrity of the right to vote. We think every person who has a legal right to vote should vote in every election, but just once, not multiple times. And one of the things I wanted to just mention to you, because I just have a few minutes here, is that we would love to have all the members join the caucus. Obviously, we would love to have a bipartisan caucus, but I'm reaching out to everyone, across the nation to support our efforts to try to bring integrity to our election process and to understand how sacred the right to vote is. And I think it's really great that Mike Garcia, the representative from California, who won by 333 votes, is joining me, who won by 109 votes in upstate New York in one of the longest election cycles in the nation. I didn't even get sworn in until February 11th. And so we just wanted to make sure everyone understands that we want to expand the number of people who vote. You hear all the time that the Republicans want to suppress the vote. Nothing could be further from the truth. We know that so many great Americans through our nation's history have lost life and limb for this sacred right to vote privately, and we want those people to exercise that right and feel that their vote actually counts. And I think one thing that my race and Representative Garcia's, also our colleague Marionette Miller-Meeks, who recently was confirmed the winner again in Iowa's 2nd District, that every vote does count, and it should be something that people joyfully do, is to exercise that right to vote, because I think a lot of people don't realize we have a self-governing constitutional republic. It is by and for the people. And I think one of the enduring themes, that one of the reasons I loved our former President Lincoln, was that he used to talk about, can we save the republic? Can we be self-governing? And we want to be sure that we preserve all of that and how great this country is by having, by actually forming this election integrity caucus to travel around the country and encourage people to register to vote and to vote. And I will add, I just visited the border, and we have a great community of refugees where my district is up in New York's 22nd District. And, I can't tell you how excited so many of these people are when they finally get to be citizens and when they have a chance to vote and when they have a chance to vote privately without somebody looking over their shoulder or knowing how they vote. And we just want to make that act sacred, and we want to make everyone aware that they have the opportunity to vote and their vote is secured, and no one is going to take their vote or dilute their vote, and that we need to make sure that we preserve the integrity of our voter rolls. It's interesting, I come from New York, and people think of New York as being this liberal bastion, which it is. But Article 2 of New York's Constitution talks about the right of suffrage. And in my own district, the first women to vote in New York State voted in Lisle, New York, in my district in New York. So we know how sacred that right is for women to have the right to vote. And Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were all hailed from New York State. So we have a great tradition of voting, and we want to lead the way toward that. And I know that that's something we'd love to have you join, Mr. Gohmert, if you're interested in joining our caucus.
And I appreciate the gentlelady's efforts, and I would be thrilled to join that caucus. That is absolutely meritorious, and it should be something that all of us work to support together. Yet we get cast as Republicans as wanting to limit the number of voters when actually we want more voters, but we need to have people vote legally, not multiple times, not voting after you no longer have a pulse, but voting as citizens. And so I'm thrilled.
Thank you. And we have many safeguards in place to preserve that right to vote,
Yep.
but also to encourage people to go out and realize that their vote does count. And wouldn't it be great if every legal citizen voted in every election? That would be a true self-governing republic that we all aspire to maintain and preserve. And once again, I cannot emphasize enough, we urge everyone to join the caucus, including our Democratic friends. I think they like what we're going to be standing for. We're going to be preserving and protecting the votes in all districts across the entire nation. And I think it's going to be a exciting initiative. And we thank you for being willing to join. I'm sorry my time is limited today, but I wanted to take advantage of this. And I wanted to also thank you, Mr. Gohmert, for taking this opportunity to be in this amazing place. The honor of being elected to this great body with so many good members on both sides of the aisle, and to be able to do the business here for the people of our country, in such a tough time in so many ways, as we're emerging hopefully from the pandemic. But I'm grateful that you take this time and talk about the news and events of the day that may get missed sometimes in the mainstream media. So grateful to you, and I want to wish you the best, and everyone a great weekend. And let's talk about election integrity. Thank you.
That's right. Yeah,
I yield back.
It brings back to mind being in Iraq back in 2005, and Iraq had just had their first true, fair election, and people stood in line for hours and hours. And in talking to a police chief, he pointed out one place where there was a very long line, and we knew that radical Islamists were going to try to disrupt the election. And there was a suicide bomber that was found in the line, and a policeman grabbed him, threw himself on top of the suicide bomber. A bomb was set off. The policeman and the radical Islamists were both killed. And I said, wow, did the voters come back? And he looked a little surprised and said, they never left the line. They knew if they got out of line and did not vote, that the policeman would have given his life for nothing. They wanted the policeman's life to count, and they were not going to be intimidated by a suicide bomber trying to prevent them from voting. So they stayed in line to vote. Too many Americans have come to think of voting as too onerous, don't really have time to do it. It doesn't really matter, when actually, as we hear and find over and over, elections do have consequences. And it is important that if you're legally allowed to vote, you should vote. And it's unfortunate that there's a push to have people that don't understand. They're not citizens. They haven't been educated yet to understand what it takes to preserve a republic, which has allowed us to drift toward a more Orwellian-style government, a totalitarian, more socialist government. And yes, you have to have a totalitarian government in order for socialism to succeed. Khrushchev finally came to grips with that. Communism, true communism, is where everybody shares and shares alike, and there's no government. And I remember doing a report in college about a commission that Khrushchev set up to figure out a plan to move to where there was no government and just pure communism, pure sharing. And ultimately, they disbanded the commission because they realized there's no way to ever have no totalitarian government. If you're going to have communism or socialism, the government's got to be big, powerful, totalitarian enough to take from those who earn and give to those who don't. So anyway, the elections are important. The next national election, of course, will be in 2022. And that's something we need to be working toward, making sure is fair. But it's difficult when you have entities like CNN that are more interested in ratings, scaring people, and supporting the Democratic Party than they are in reporting the news. It really makes it difficult to have free and fair elections when people are being deceived. It was also interesting that since James O'Keefe, who founded Project Veritas, Getting the Truth Out, he had the video of CNN, a leader at CNN exposing exactly what CNN was about, helping the Democratic Party, scaring Americans. Twitter, being part of the high-tech oligarchy, has banned Project Veritas. O'Keefe's, the founder, first banned, and then later it was indicated it was banned. He was banned permanently for violating the Twitter rules on platform manipulation and spam. So, according to Twitter, if you expose the truth about somebody or some entity that Twitter is figuratively in bed with, then Twitter will ban you because they don't want the truth out there. They don't want the truth about Americans being manipulated by entities like CNN or Twitter or Facebook or Google. They don't want American people finding that out, so they will ban you. And when any entity is powerful enough that it can prevent people from, say, learning about the vice president's family member who may have engaged in impropriety, or from finding out that actually when the current president, at that time a candidate for president, was saying that Russia was paying bounties to kill American soldiers, which people promoting the story, at least some of them, knew was not true, knew was not likely true, that they want that falsity out there. They want to hurt a candidate with false news. And I don't know what the Supreme Court will end up doing, but the Sullivan case is there, requiring malice to be shown by a public figure in order to prevail in a lawsuit. But it ought to be clear, especially with things like this video exposing that CNN is out to destroy Matt Gaetz, out to deceive the American public, out to fearmonger, to increase ratings, even though it hurts America. They don't care about, it's okay in CNN's leadership mind to harm America if it helps their ratings. We've seen the same thing from Major League Baseball and some international corporations. They're okay with doing business with the Chinese Communist Party and benefiting them, helping them, making money for them, if it makes money for the corporation or the sport, even though it's greatly to the detriment of millions, or in the case of Chinese Communist Party, hundreds of millions or billion people. It's okay in the minds of some of these people. It's okay to be totally hypocritical and hurt black-owned businesses in Atlanta, where they're so prevalent, and moving the All-Star game to a place that is substantially white, if it makes you appear woke, even though you're hurting African-American businesses and helping white businesses. It's okay to help the Chinese Communist Party which is trying to destroy America. They're trying to get to a place where the American economy could collapse and China would survive that economically. And if they get to that place, then you will see them taking additional actions rather profoundly to bring down our economy and leave them remaining as the only, at that point, superpower. So we've got to be wise, more wise than we have been, and we need to call out corporations or entities in the United States that are out to help the enemies of the United States and stir up divisiveness within the United States if they think it creates a profit. We're seeing that with CNN, we're seeing that with Major League Baseball. It's just a sad time in America. This article from the Epoch Times says, Twitter pointed to a section in the company's rules which states, quote, "You can't mislead others on Twitter by operating fake accounts," and, quote, "You can't artificially amplify or disrupt conversations through the use of multiple accounts." Well, Twitter really has to stretch in order to come up with a basis for banning someone who is promoting truth and is exposing truth that CNN did not want exposed, and obviously Twitter did not want exposed. This story by Alan Bakari, Twitter permanently blacklists James O'Keefe after CNN expose. These articles, this one also mentions in the first video, Chester admits that CNN's negative coverage of unproven allegations against Representative Matt Gaetz is, quote, propaganda, unquote, because Gaetz is a, quote, problem for the Democrats, unquote. And yeah, I'm told he's nice looking. I don't see it, but I'm told he's nice looking, and he comes across well. I do hear that and see him come across well. He's quite smart, quite clever, and insightful. And the CNN leader says, quote, "It would be great for the Democrat Party to get him out. So we're going to keep running those stories to keep hurting him," unquote. In further undercover footage posted today, Chester can be heard admitting that CNN is unlikely to give a great deal of attention to the race of a mass shooter in its coverage if they, quote, aren't white, unquote. Chester also admits that, quote, "a bunch of black men," unquote, have been responsible for recent violent attacks against Asian Americans, and that this is a problem because, quote, "the optics of that are not good," unquote, and CNN is, quote, "trying to help BLM," unquote. And BLM, let's be fair, they are trying to establish socialism and get rid of the constitutional government we have and move to a more Orwellian socialist type government. Quote, "This is pure censorship for political reasons because he has successfully exposed CNN," talking about Twitter banning O'Keefe. And that's a comment from Robbie Starbuck on Twitter. My friend Matt Gaetz says, quote, "O'Keefe exposes CNN for lying about me and Donald Trump for propaganda, then Twitter suspends him." Conservative commentator John Cardillo says if the left weren't terrified, they wouldn't be banning people. So anyway, it's rather tragic that Twitter has joined in to become a part of figuratively, the ministry of truth that Orwell talked about in his novel 1984. I mean, Orwell was apparently in a great deal of pain, dying of cancer, had been through brutal cancer treatments. Some think that's where he came up with the idea of some of the torture that was utilized by the ministry of love, which would arrest people with whom they had disagreed and would torture them for hours, days, weeks, months, or many years, whatever was necessary to finally get them to change their story. But the ministry of truth was the ones that were constantly rewriting history to serve the interests of this totalitarian government. And that appears exactly what we're beginning to see from many of our own, in our own media in the United States. And I was struck the summer that I was an exchange student to the Soviet Union, how Pravda always, it was like the ministry of truth that Orwell wrote about. They would change any story in order to make the Soviet government the prime player, the prime interested party. They would lie about anything. And in the summer of '73, I was intrigued. They were saying that about this Watergate thing, that was clearly stirred up by the Democrats against Richard Nixon, because Nixon had had the courage to be the first U.S. president to go to the Soviet Union and to reach out to create a viable relationship with the Soviet Union. So the Democrats were totally manufacturing Watergate just because Nixon had dared to be friendly toward the Soviet Union. Well, we know that was not the case, but that's the way the Soviet Union would use the media, Pravda, to lie about what was going on to make them the central players in everything. Obviously, Watergate was real. There was a manipulation of the law, and if you listen to some of the tapes or read some of the transcripts of the Nixon tapes, you're struck by the inconsistency and the ability of a president of the United States to be two-faced in talking to different people and in the manipulative approach to being president. So hopefully the truth will all come out. If it does, apparently, unless Twitter and CNN change their approach to news, the truth will not come from Twitter, will not come from CNN, but hopefully emerging news sources will take the place of the once great CNN. Unless CNN begins to report more truthfully, that would be a welcome change. And we can all hold on to that hope that springs eternal in the human breast, that maybe someday somebody will take over at CNN that will see CNN's viewership surge because they've decided finally to be going after real news and truth instead of manipulating things for the Democratic National Committee or an entity like Black Lives Matter. Of course they matter. But that's not what BLM is about. They're about moving America towards socialism. They're about destroying the nuclear family, which the war on poverty helped do for black families, and now it's all families. We've seen that happen, and Thomas Sowell and Candace Owens have both covered that very effectively in their recent books. this article from Joel Pollack, April 16th. Patrice Cullors, a co-founder of Black Lives Matter, told interviewer Mark Lamont Hill on Thursday that there is no contradiction between her radical left-wing politics and owning 4 homes because she's providing for extended family. In the interview on Black News Tonight, Hill asked Cullors, also known as Khan Cullors, after spouse Janiyah Khan, about the truth of reports that she had bought 4 homes since 2016, including a $1.4 million compound in the remote Topanga Canyon neighborhood of Los Angeles and a vacation home with an airplane hangar in Georgia, and that she and her spouse had considered buying exclusive property in the Bahamas also. The reports prompted criticism from within the Black Lives Matter movement, and I would hope that it would, and questions about her source of funds. She replied that she'd never taken a salary from Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, and that she had other sources of income from her work as a college professor, TV producer, author, and a YouTube content creator. In a statement, the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation said she'd not received compensation from that group since 2019, though she had received $120,000 from the group since 2013 for performing specific duties. She added, organizers should get paid for the work they do. But now, having spent a summer in the Soviet Union, I know how socialism is supposed to go. And there were Soviet friends that were somewhat disenfranchised with the socialist way of doing things. They said, yeah, we all receive about the same amount of money, but those who have leadership positions or political power, they get to buy things the rest of us don't buy. We've all got about the same money to spend, but we don't have access to the things that they do. So in a true socialist country, people that want power, if you have a shoe store, then we saw it back then, they will take the best shoes and save them for people in political positions of power. And so when those power brokers come in, then they get to pick from the best shoes, while all the rest are told, well, you either take these or you don't get any. There just are no others. If you were a power broker, yeah, you had about the same amount of to spend as everybody else, but everybody else was told there is no toilet paper, whereas the power brokers would be taken to the back and allowed to buy toilet paper. Those were the days, and that's normally the way it works. And on one occasion, I was surprised because a cleaning lady appeared that she was going to be running and telling on the Soviet citizen. And I said, why would she go tell on you? And he said, look, in your country, you can get ahead by working harder and making more money. In our country, we all make about the same. So the only way you can get ahead is if you step on other people. So yes, she will go tell on me, and she will go up a little bit in power, because that's how you get ahead here in the Soviet Union. You step on other people, and that elevates you. So that's where some are wanting to take the United States, where everybody's getting about the same amount of money, except that apparently we have leaders like this in the BLM movement who think, and as she said she's a trained Marxist, those are her words, and she lived your lived practice, she said, but she's not. Well, she says, the way that I live my life is a direct support to black people, including my black family members, first and foremost. I see my money as not my own. I see it as my family's money as well. But a true socialist would not say that, because a true socialist says everybody shares and shares alike, from those according to their ability to those according to their needs. And so your family can't be foremost if you're a true socialist. So there's some confusion here on what is true socialism, and Ms. Cullors does not have that down very well. She's, according to the article, buying a $1.4 million compound in an exclusive part of Los Angeles and a vacation home with an airplane hangar in Georgia. No, that's not supposed to happen if you're a true socialist. You share and share alike. You may think you've earned all this money, as she said she had, doing all these different things, but a true socialist would say, no, but we're going to share that with everybody. Apparently, she would appropriately think, I have all this additional ability that others don't have, and so you should take my money away from me, from those according to their ability, and give it to those according to their needs. So she's got a ways to go before she understands the socialism that she's trying to force on the United States. To the point of the criticism, Ms. Cullors said was, quote, to discredit me, but also to discredit the movement. She said, we have to stay focused on white supremacy. Yeah, don't look behind the curtains at the guy that's manipulating things, as we saw in The Wizard of Oz. No, keep looking over here at what we will call white supremacy. Anyway, she responded to claims that Black Lives Matter should distribute funds to the black community by noting that while she was sympathetic, the organization was not a charity and was not the government. So she's got a ways to go before she really understands the socialism she's trying to force on everybody else. She says our target should be calling on Congress to pass reparations. Well, she doesn't understand. True reparations in a socialist society would take from somebody that had a $1.4 million to spend on a home and spread it out to everybody else, so she could never own a $1.4 million home. But anyway, hopefully others will help her, and any other leaders with Black Lives Matter that don't understand what they're trying to force on America, and we will see if that actually happens. Now, I heard our majority leader in his, what some call colloquy or soliloquy, whatever you want to call it, talking about compassion for those who are foreigners. And it strikes me there are so many people across America, in the lamestream media, and even on this floor, that think it's compassionate to lure people across miles, hundreds or thousands of miles even, across horrendous terrain, have them pay drug cartels which thoroughly oppress a country like Mexico, have as much maybe as 25-30% of young women raped, we're told often repeatedly, on that journey, have many girls subjected to a life of sex trafficking in order to pay back the money they owe to the drug cartels, others subjected to human trafficking and drug trafficking in order to pay back the money they owe to the drug cartels, creating a life as a servant, as a bondsman to the drug cartels, where people have no hesitation to cut off fingers, hands, arms, or heads and put on pikes, like some honest policemen have had happen, as a message from the drug cartels: you don't mess with us. Somehow that's compassionate to add to the billions of dollars the drug cartels have to terrorize a country or a hemisphere. But if you really look closely enough at this problem on our southern border, you'll find that's not compassionate at all. The most compassionate, caring, neighborly, Christian thing we could do for the people of Mexico would be to secure our southern border, cut the billions of dollars going to the drug cartels that they use to terrorize a continent. Just cut that down to a trickle. They may always make some, but you could cut it to a trickle if we secured our southern border. And then Mexico, because of the incredible people in Mexico, some of the hardest workers in the world, and with natural resources in excess of most of the countries in the world, and actually a better location between the Atlantic and Pacific. Yes, we're between the Atlantic and Pacific in the United States, but it's closer across Mexico from one ocean to the other. They're in prime location. They ought to be a top economy in the world. And the only thing that appears to be holding them back, the one thing, is the corruption from the drug cartels that has greatly increased under this new administration. It is a boon to the drug cartels that President Biden is helping their human trafficking business as he is. Now, he doesn't look at it, I'm sure, as helping the drug cartels. He's looking at it as helping the Democratic National Committee down the road when they can give amnesty and make them voters. But that is so hurtful to Mexico. How about cutting the power of the drug cartels and allowing Mexico to keep its own citizens, and Central American countries that are being depleted of good, hardworking people, letting them keep their citizens, getting rid of the corruption. We're the main source of the funding for the corruption south of our border. Compassion would dictate that we stop funding the corruption instead of turning a blind eye to that corruption that we're funding through the drug, sex trafficking, human trafficking. Cut that down to nothing or very, very little, and watch how our good neighbors will explode with a vibrant economy. Not with terrorism that drug cartels use. Chip Roy has a bill to name the two main drug cartels as terrorist organizations. And I think that's exactly what we should do. That would allow more resources to go towards stopping the terrorism and the corruption within Mexico and within Central America. That's what a good neighbor would do. That's what real compassion is. Compassion is not luring people to situations that destroy their lives. The indentured servitude that the drug cartels subject these people to is just unfathomable. and unfathomable that educated people, including here in Washington, D.C., would say, oh, yes, that's a good thing that we lure people here, even though they become just indentured to the drug cartels. I've mentioned before, I've been there all hours of the day and night, but especially at night because it's easier to get drugs across. So in the dark, that is. So the drug cartels totally control who comes across and when they come across and in what numbers they come across. And as the Border Patrol, when they're down there and don't have supervisors watching over them every moment, they will tell you, we know when we have a big group come across and we're all having to come together to get them in process, that's when they're bringing in large amounts of drugs or some high-value customer, perhaps from a Middle Eastern country, a place like Yemen where 2 terrorists were picked up on the terrorist watch list. But, of course, if they're not going to be able to get through customs because they're on the terrorist watch list, well, for goodness sakes, all they got to do is come to Mexico. The drug cartels will charge them extra money, somewhere north of $35,000 or so, maybe much more than that. But they make a lot of money if somebody wants to come and is on the terrorist watch list. I was told down there, if you're coming from China, you're probably going to pay $35,000 or more. But some of the Middle Easterners, they may pay a lot more than that to avoid being detected coming in. So let's be compassionate. Let's allow countries south of our border to keep their citizens and grow a vibrant economy where people won't have to come begging to the United States. They will have their own vibrant economy, and they will be blessed immeasurably because of it. Now, I do want to say a special word of tribute. I know our former speaker, Boehner, has been in the media recently, and I've been asked about comments he's made about some of us. He was an interesting speaker. I don't know if he knows who Machiavelli was, but he employed some of those tactics. I remember July, I believe it was, of 2011, when he was pushing a big sequester deal. I got up at conference and said, look, and I know he apparently said, I haven't seen it, but I read he said that I didn't make sense. But I stood up at conference, and I can understand sometimes his mind was a little clouded, might not seem to make sense, but I pointed out this sequester deal is a mistake. It's a terrible mistake because you're going to cost billions of dollars for the military, to our own defense. That's our own security. And I actually said in front of the whole conference, look, when I was in high school, a friend's father was in a poker game, and he thought he had a hand that nobody could beat. He was out of money, so he put his home on the table, and somebody had a hand that beat him, and he lost his home in a card game. And I've known since that time, you never gamble with your own security, your family's security, your country's security. And Speaker Boehner said, Louis, listen, those sequesters will never happen. And I said, of course they're going to happen. And he said, no, because we have this super committee that will reach an agreement, because if they don't, I forget it was $200-300 billion in cuts to Medicare will happen. And I said, of course there will be no agreement, because Obamacare cut $716 billion from Medicare, from our seniors' coverage for health care. And they did it without a single Republican House vote. So the only way in 2012 the Democrats will be able to run a commercial that says Republicans cut Medicare is for the Democrats to prevent an agreement by the supercommittee, so the cuts will take place to Medicare and the defense, and the Democrats will get a twofer. I explained to Speaker Boehner. They will be able to cut the defense, which they've been wanting to do, and there'll be a cut to Medicare that they'll blame on Republicans' unwillingness to compromise. And as I recall, there were a couple of senators that even proposed a way to raise fees that wouldn't be called taxes. And there was an article that said Democrats thought that was going to get a deal worked out. Then they met with Democratic leaders, and they had to come back and say, you really made a good faith offer, but we're told there won't be a deal. Well, I tried to explain that's what would be coming, just as it happened, to the Speaker. But as the Speaker has now admitted, I didn't make sense to him, because he had said those sequesters will never happen. And before the end of the year, that was in July, before the end of the year, he had to come before the Republican conference and explain why the sequesters were going to happen, but we're going to try to minimize the damage. Also remember another summer when there was the funds were running out for a particular area of our budget or of our appropriations, and we were going to have to do something before we went out on August break. And I'd asked my dear friend Thomas Massey, said, have you talked to McConnell, or are we going to get a deal on this? He said, yeah, I was at a breakfast with him this morning, and he said he and Boehner had an agreement, and we're going to extend the funds for a couple of months, and they're going to throw in some additional money to help veterans. They've got it all worked out. So we're listening as Speaker Boehner gets up, and he says, what often happens is the Senate passes something and leaves town, and they jam us, and then we have to pass what the Senate passed. But here's what we're going to do. He even put his finger in there. He said, we are going to pass a bill, and we're going to extend this couple of months, the funding. We're going to put some money in there for veterans, and then we're going to pass it, and we're going to leave town, and we're going to jam the Senate. And most of the House Republicans jumped to their feet and were giving him a standing ovation, because the Speaker just told us we were going to jam the Senate, even though, according to what Senator McConnell told another Kentuckian, he and Boehner had a deal worked out. But it got Speaker Boehner a standing ovation and big, loud cheers, not from my friend Representative Massey and myself, because we knew what the truth was. But anyway, some people I hear miss those days where he was Speaker and did things like that, or totally missed an opportunity on cut, cap, and balance. Speaker Boehner said that could never pass the House of Representatives. We assured him it could, and it would, if he would just bring it to the floor. So he finally agreed, and he brought it to the floor, and it passed, and it was a huge victory, a huge day. But by that very afternoon, he was already talking about scrapping that and working a deal with the Senate. In other words, he had no intention of carrying out the will of the House as we had just passed it, which would have been great for lowering the indebtedness and getting America on a financially secure path, he was already scrapping the big victory we had before it even had a chance to be discussed in the Senate. So I know there's some that miss those days, but if God grants us the chance to be in the majority again, we can't go back to those days of manipulation. We got to be straightforward with the American people. We got to have leaders that will do that. And we've got to be about the business of turning this country back to where freedom is the watchword for the day, not government oppression, not government putting businesses out of business, but letting freedom ring for real once again. And with that, I yield back.